Hi, my name is Kelsey Vivash, and this video is called Gender Minoritization in Contemporary Theatre Practice. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto's Centre for Drama, Theatre, and Performance Studies. My research focuses on the historical and contemporary use of bodily fluids in performance practice, and how their inclusion might relate to social and cultural understandings of subjectivity. My work is imagined through a feminist lens and often focuses on contemporary female performance artists. I'm fascinated with the ways in which gender, subjecthood, and bodies intersect with one another. As such, I'm excited to be here to speak about gender minoritization in contemporary theatre practice, that is to say, how cis women, trans people, and those with non-conforming genders are perceived to be and represented as lesser than. There is a lot to consider when speaking about gender minoritization in the field of theatre and performance. The first thing to acknowledge is that gender minoritization occurs in both form and content in the theatre. That is, while we can speak at length about the representation of, for example, women in contemporary playtexts, or the way in which contemporary theatres handle performances of historical texts that offer poor representations of women, there is also much to consider with regards to the roles that women, trans people, and people with non-binary genders fill within the writing, directing, and producing of theatre and performance. Unfortunately, there is very little statistical research that analyzes the inclusion of trans and gender non-conforming people within the field of theatre, and so my discussion in this regard will, instead, focus on interviews with trans people working within the field. With regards to the inclusion of women, I will be referring to the extremely comprehensive 2015 report on equity in Canadian theatre written by Michelle MacArthur, and a 2015 study by Nicholas Hansen and Alexa Elser that offers a statistical breakdown regarding plays performed in Canadian universities and colleges as analysed by the gender of their playwrights. A second thing to consider here is that contemporary gender minoritization in theatre is rooted in a history of this type of exclusion, discrimination, stereotyping, and marginalization, and that due to the pervasive nature of this history, performances on contemporary stages can, if not executed with careful consideration to the politics of gender, very easily reiterate offensive historical stereotypes and prejudices. This is, of course, also true with regards to race, ability, sexual orientation, age, etc. For a salient analysis of these prejudices, you should refer to other videos in this series. Regarding the contemporary presentation of gender in contemporary performance, however, I will be referring to the work of companies and performers whose work is particularly accomplished in this regard, and whose strategies may provide a useful starting point for others approaching texts whose gender politics are questionable. While I recognize that this short video can only present a cursory look at a huge and complex topic, I hope that it will raise important questions and provide a starting place from which to engage in further research on what is a critical and timely topic. So to begin with, let's discuss women, trans people, and gender non-conforming people, and the roles that they fill in contemporary theatre practice. At the 2015 Canadian Association of Theatre Research, CATR, conference at the University of Ottawa, I was lucky enough to attend a roundtable discussion titled Staging Equity, Actualization or Appropriation, which was organized by Lane Zisman Newman and Rebecca Burton of Equity in Theatre, EIT. EIT describes itself as, quote, an inclusive, multifaceted, and multi-partnered initiative designed to remedy existent inequities in the cultural sector, end quote. And their work over the last year has been instrumental in publicizing the often bleak research that discusses and analyzes gender equity in theatre. The roundtable that they hosted at CATR featured statistics from Michelle MacArthur's 2015 report on gender equity, and also contained the aforementioned paper by Nicholas Hansen and Alexa Elser, who turned their attention to artistic programming at Canadian colleges and universities. Together, These statistics were alarming. MacArthur's report asserts that while women make up more than half of all theater school students, after they graduate, their representation in creative leadership roles drops to fewer than 30%. She goes on to specify that the most inequitable field within the theater is that of playwriting. She cites a 2013-2014 study by Playwrights Guild of Canada in which they report that of the 812 productions staged over the 2013-2014 season, 63% were written by men, while only 22% were authored by women and 15% penned by mixed-gender partnerships. For their part, Hansen and Elser take their statistical analysis from productions at Canadian post-secondary institutions, presenting a result that speaks to massive inequity with regards to the work produced therein. The information that they gathered was taken from 43 Canadian schools and analyzed 434 theatrical productions. Of these, 74% were male-authored, 18% were written by women, and 8% emerged from mixed-gender partnerships. Indeed, there were 12 institutions that staged a total of 0 plays by women for the 3-year period of 2012 to 2015, meaning, as Hansen and Elser pointed out, that some students could have started and finished their programs without ever seeing a play by a woman performed by their institution. To return momentarily to Michelle MacArthur's report, one of the recommendations that MacArthur calls for is statistical analysis that breaks down her own findings into categories that will lend an intersectional eye to the research and provide analysis on the experiences of other marginalized groups, including LGBTQ. Unfortunately, this research has yet to be undertaken, and so a statistical analysis of the inclusion of trans people and people with non-binary genders is not available to me for this video. I have, however, spoken with trans and gender non-conforming professionals and theater students about their experiences and would like to share some of their thoughts. One trans man I spoke to named Ian intimated to me that his experiences with the theater company he currently works with had, on the whole, been quite positive, but that his perception of the broader theater industry with regards to its treatment of trans people was significantly less so. Working with Twitches and Itches, a Niagara-based company dedicated to the creation of new works, Ian has found himself well supported and his experiences well represented. His fears that his vocal range would change during his transition and alter his abilities as a singer were heard by the company's artistic director, who responded by suggesting that the company support a one-person show about a trans singer trying to maintain a sense of artistry while transitioning. The show will feature music that Ian records as a duet with himself, with one voice recorded prior to Ian beginning testosterone, and one voice recorded 6 months later. Despite the support from his company, however, Ian assessed the general tenor of gender-based marginalization in the industry to be quite rampant. For example, in terms of technical jobs that Ian was offered, he noted that he felt as though he was taken less seriously when he presented as a queer woman than when he began identifying as male. He described this as feeling more as though he were one of the guys on the team after coming out as trans, and noted that he was given more responsibility and was allowed more of a leadership role in which he was hired as the solitary go-to guy for tech work, whereas previously he had always been part of a team. Additionally, in terms of his acting work, Ian noted that he was told by an empathetic and supportive acting and voice coach that unfortunately, due to the current climate in the field, he would be more likely to receive roles in productions once he could pass as male than he has been able to acquire while presenting as a queer woman. Now that we know a little about the state of the field when it comes to employment, let's turn to look at representations of gender in performances on the contemporary stage. Specifically, I'd like to take a brief look at what problems can arise in performances with regards to gender representation, and then follow this up by discussing theater companies and performers who actively work to ensure that they don't reinscribe harmful biases through their performances and in their teachings, and indeed to actively work against them by promoting marginalized voices. Problems with regards to gender representation in performance can arise in a number of different ways. Firstly, historical texts that are not treated with a sufficiently critical eye can operate to perpetuate harmful gender stereotypes when performed on contemporary stages. Take, for example, the regular contemporary portrayals of August Strindberg's Miss Julie, a strongly misogynist text in which women are demonized and their sexuality is pathologized. Additionally, training bodies to perform in historical roles can become an exclusionary practice without careful attention to the politics being presented. Even strategies used to combat this, such as colorblind casting and cross-gender casting, can be extremely problematic, as they ignore the diverse experiences of marginalized people in historical times. There are issues regarding the representation of trans and gender nonconforming people too, as they are not sufficiently represented in contemporary productions. The result of this is that trans and gender nonconforming stories and voices are not heard, and actors with non-binary genders have limited roles in which they can be cast, particularly when these roles are offered to cisgender actors, for example in films like Trans America and Boys Don't Cry, and television series Hit and Miss. Finally, issues with the sexualization of women, particularly women of color, persist in some contemporary performances of both historical and contemporary texts. Women are regularly depicted as either virginal, matronly, or promiscuous.